2 gigabytes VRAM. 2 gigabytes made sense once, around 2012. Back when games were simpler, textures were smaller, and nobody was running AI locally. That era is gone. In 2025, 2 gigabytes VRAM can't handle modern game textures, can't run AI tools, can barely keep up with hardware-accelerated video playback. If you're sitting on a 2 gigabyte card right now, you're not gaming, you're surviving. There's no patch for this, no driver update, no settings tweak that brings it back. Time to move on. 4 gigabytes. VRAM 4 gigabytes feels like a step up. And technically, it is. You can run older titles, some indie games, basic 1080p if you dial settings down. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. The vast majority of games released in the last 2 years either recommend or require more than 4 gigabytes just to run properly. You'll spend more time tweaking settings than actually playing. For AI, 4 gigabytes can technically run the smallest quantized language models. Keyword, technically. It's painful. It's slow. And your patience will run out before the model finishes loading. Many AI tools now won't even launch below 6 gigabytes. They just refuse. You're not just limited, you're locked out of entire workflows before you start. Skip 4 gigabytes on any new purchase. It's already behind before you even unbox it. 6 gigabytes VRAM. And this is where something shifts. 6 gigabytes is the first tier where gaming actually feels real. 1080p at solid frame rates, textures that look like the developers intended, no constant compromising. Cards like the GTX 1060. 6 gigabytes built an entire generation of gamers. The RTX 3060 Ti carried that tradition forward. These weren't just popular cards. They were the cards that made PC gaming accessible to millions who couldn't spend 4 figures on a GPU. For AI, 6 gigabytes opens the door, just barely. Stable diffusion runs. Quantized models load. You're working at the edge of what's possible, but you're working. A lot of people learned AI image generation on 6 gigabyte cards because that's what they had. For anyone on a tight budget who wants genuine performance, 6 gigabytes still delivers. Just know you're close to the ceiling on anything demanding. And that ceiling is getting lower every year as tools get heavier. 8 gigabytes VRAM. Here's the number everyone defaults to, and honestly, for most people, it's still the right call. 8 gigabytes is the mainstream standard for a reason. It handles 1080p without breaking a sweat, manages 1440p in most titles, and leaves enough room for modern texture packs that would have seemed insane 5 years ago. The RTX 4060 lives here. The RX 7602. Solid, proven, dependable. For AI and creative work, 8 gigabytes lets you run mid-sized language models, generating higher resolution images with stable diffusion, and handle light video editing without constantly watching a memory bar creep toward red. It's genuinely capable, not just a compromised tier. But here's the part most people skip over. Some current AAA titles are already grazing the 8 gigabyte ceiling at high settings. Not all of them, not most of them, but enough that you're going to feel it in the next year or two. Developers are not getting more conservative with VRAM usage. They never do. 8 gigabytes is excellent today. Just don't assume it's future-proof. 12 gigabytes VRAM. Now this is interesting because 12 gigabytes doesn't just give you more room, it changes what you can actually do. 1440p gaming becomes genuinely comfortable. High-resolution texture mods stop crashing your session. You stop making mental compromises before you even launch a game. The RTX 3060 12 gigabytes became one of the most talked about cards in the AI community. Not because of its raw performance, but because of that VRAM. NVIDIA released a mid-range card with more memory than most of its own higher-tier lineup at the time. And the AI community immediately understood what that meant. You could run real stable diffusion workflows, load larger language models, and actually experiment instead of constantly fighting your hardware. People were choosing the 3060 12 gigabytes over faster cards specifically because of the memory headroom. That tells you everything. That's the underrated value of 12 gigabytes. It's not just more space, it's more possibility. For hobbyist AI users, this is probably the most important tier in the entire lineup, the point where tinkering becomes actual productivity. 16 gigabyte VRAM. 16 gigabytes is where you stop apologizing. 4K gaming without the constant mental negotiation of which settings to sacrifice. Complex 3D scenes that don't stall out mid-render. Video editing timelines with high-resolution footage that actually play back smoothly. The RTX 4070 Ti sits here. So does the RX 7900G RE. And for AI development, 16 gigabytes is a genuine turning point. You're loading 13 billion parameter models without quantization workarounds. You're fine-tuning smaller networks without constantly crashing into a memory wall. The difference between 12 and 16 gigabytes isn't just 4 gigabytes. It's the difference between running a model and actually developing with one. Between hobbyist and practitioner. Most regular gamers don't need 16 gigabytes yet. But if your work sits at the intersection of creation and computation, this is exactly where you want to be. A 24 gigabytes VRAM. Most people assume the jump from 16 to 24 gigabytes is just a luxury upgrade. More for people who want to brag about specs than people who actually need it. That assumption is wrong. 24 gigabytes is the threshold where serious AI work becomes genuinely comfortable. Not just possible, comfortable. Running large language models locally without quantization gymnastics, fine-tuning mid-sized models without babysitting memory usage, generating AI video, working with multimodal systems that would choke anything smaller. The RTX 4090 sits at 24 gigabytes, and it's become the default recommendation for anyone doing real AI research outside of a data center. That's not a coincidence. That's the memory requirement of the work. For pure gaming, yes, it's overkill. But if AI workloads are any part of your life, 24 gigabytes stops being a luxury and starts being a baseline. Every gigabyte gets used, usually all at once. 48 gigabytes and beyond. And then there's this tier, which is barely consumer hardware anymore. 48 gigabytes and above is built for one thing: scale. Training models that don't fit anywhere else. Running multiple large models simultaneously, enterprise inference, scientific simulation, visual effects pipelines at studios where a single frame can take hours to render. Cards like the RTX A6000, the H100, the MI300X. These don't show up in gaming benchmarks because they were never built for gaming. They were built for the kind of computation that makes the tools you use possible. The AI models you run locally, someone trained them on hardware like this. If you're watching this video, trying to decide whether you need 48 gigabytes, the answer is no.